Today we'll be looking at the ECS P4ITA Motherboard. Of course, this is the Pentium 4, the PGA 423-pin CPU. You cannot use the newer pin Pentium 4s on this particular motherboard. And of course you have options here to put PC600 or PC800 memory. You have your primary and your secondary and your floppy right here. And of course you have the ATA 100 hard drive capability on this motherboard. You have one AGP and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 PCI slots. You also have onboard audio on this, if I can show you on the other side here. This is the onboard audio. This, of course, is the COM ports, the parallel port, the 2 USB ports, as well as your mouse and your keyboard ports right here. There is also a few other things that you can get as optional when you purchase this motherboard. You can get Onboard Lan, and you can also get FireWire on board as well with this motherboard. However, that is an optional feature. So first here, let's go over the Pentium 4 chip. This is the Pentium 4 CPU, and with all Pentium 4s, whether they're 423 pin or 4 Arctic Silver 2 for this. Now there are a few Pentium 4 coolers on the market. You could use retail, or you could use Vantech has a few as well, which you can use. So it's really dependent on what you really want to be using it for. The retail are fine, and they do come with, of course, the retail version of the Pentium 4 CPU. If you buy an OEM version of the CPU, of course, you will not get a cooler, so you will have the choice then to go out and purchase. Of course, you'll be forced to at that point. But the retail, for in most cases, if you're not overclocking, and even if you are overclocking, in a lot of cases, the Pentium 4 retail heatsink is quite adequate. Now, let me just show you how this is actually placed. It's an ingenious way, actually, of how they go about doing this. They have two brackets on either side here of the CPU, and once that is placed, as you can see, it's very easy. It just kind of lodges on top of the CPU, and then you have these little steel brackets here which go on right here and one over here. Very simple. You do not have to have any kind of excessive force pressing down to try and get the CPU cooler on. It's very, very simple. So let me do that now. So there you have it. It's installed very simply. Again, this clip and then this clip over here. The clips have grooves, one on this side of the clip and one here and one here. So you have essentially 3 clipping points on either side of the cooler. Forget to install the power supply feed to this into your motherboard. Now, as for memory, you could use PC600 or PC800. I'm using the NEC PC800 memory. And let me install you and show you here how this is actually installed. You're going to have to install at least a minimum of 2 pieces of memory. And in my case, I'm using 2/6 of 128. And these are little fillers. So you need to place these fillers in the same bank on each side. Again, you can see I need to put my memory here and here. If these fillers were here and here, I will put the memory here and here. So what I'm going to do now is just pop this memory into the system. So let's now go into installing a Pentium 4 power supply onto this motherboard. It is quite different than a Pentium 3 setup or an AMD setup. The difference being there is 3 connectors on the motherboard, so you have to get a power supply that will support the Pentium 4 motherboard which you're using. In this case, you're going to need one with 3 connectors. I am using an Enermax power supply. And let me just show you how easy this is to set up. You have 3 leads. I can show you these here. This is one of them. This is the other. And finally, this one as well. Let me now plug those in to these places on the motherboard. So very simple. Once you have a power supply that does support this particular motherboard. Very simple, you plug it in and it's all connected. This is the BIOS of this particular motherboard. It looks very standard here, going through the standard CMOS features, going into the advanced BIOS features, advanced chipset, plug and play, and so on. I'll just go through a few things here. This is within the advanced BIOS features. Of course, you've got your standard things here like your CPU L1, L2 cache enabled, disabled, your boot sequence, CD-ROMs, hard drives, so on and so forth to boot into here. You've got your hard drive SMART compatibility. You can enable or disable that. Normally that, with it enabled, will give you more reliability, and it will warn you if your hard drive is about to fail. Going into the advanced BIOS chipset. Now in here you have the options to control some of the memory settings. You can go to auto, so it will automatically detect if you have PC600 or PC800 memory installed here. Of course, you'll look at here, it's 400 for the 800, PC800, and 300 for the PC600 memory. Of course, you can buy ECC or non-ECC memory, and normal things here like system BIOS cacheable, video BIOS cacheable, and so on in here. Integrated peripherals is very common to a lot of BIOSes, and in here you would enable or disable your onboard modem, your onboard audio, and so on and so forth. In here you've got your parallel port configurations, your COM port configurations. You can assign an IRQ for the onboard sound on this motherboard. You have here an option in the BIOS as well called Pcl Status. This gives you details like voltages, temperature settings. You can do a CPU threshold temperature, so the system will shut down when it reaches a certain temperature as well in here. Another option here in this motherboard BIOS is the frequency voltage control. There is no voltage controls in here. Maybe in a future release there will be. You have an option in here for the front side bus settings. Now this of course is to set or overclock the CPU. I can get this particular 1.5 up to 1.7, however anything beyond 105, anything beyond 1570 megahertz, the audio on board will not work. However, you can get a PCI card, audio card, disable the onboard sound card, and have the system at 1.7, and that is at default voltage. Again, there is no voltage settings within this particular BIOS. I'm using a program here called SciSoft Sandra. This is the CPU benchmark. This particular CPU at 1.5 gigahertz, the Pentium 4 423-pin CPU. I'm getting a result 2979 MIPS and 1939 mFlops. Now when comparing this to a 1.33 AMD Athlon CPU, this CPU is a little slower. Looking at the result on the 1.33, it's 3750 MIPS in comparison to the Pentium 4, which is 2979 MIPS. So there is certainly a disadvantage there when you're doing benchmarks. In this particular benchmark, the result is a little lower. Now let's go on. I'll show you the memory result in this particular CPU using the 800 memory. This is the memory benchmark program, and as you can see here, the top one is this particular CPU, and it is pretty much above all the rest. Again, I'm using PC800 memory. The result is 1406 megabytes per second. If we compare that, for example, to a VIA chipset motherboard, an AMD setup, at normal results and normal settings, the AMD would be around 507 megabytes per second. Now, when comparing that to 1406 megabytes per second, certainly the memory results on the Pentium 4 motherboard are way, way beyond the result of anything that a regular AMD